Hello, I'm Chris Kruger, Senior Content Manager with the Phinney Foundation, and I'm happy to be here to talk with Dr. Mark Stacy about a really interesting new clinical trial called Sunrise PD. Dr. Stacy is an advisor to BioV, the company sponsoring the study. And before we get into the details, I'd wonder if Dr. Stacy, can you just share a little bit of your background in clinical practice and also your research experience?
Sure, Chris. It's nice to be back with you. I have been in Parkinson's disease since a fellowship in 1990, where I studied with Dr. Jankovic at Baylor College of Medicine. I spent part of my career at the University of Missouri. I then started the Muhammad Ali Center in Phoenix, Arizona, and went to Duke for the bulk of my career. My research has been really in non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease and really impulse control disorders like pathological gambling. So I've had 30 years of experience plus in Parkinson's disease and have done extensive clinical trial work as part of multi-center trials and even served on the executive committee for the Parkinson's Study Group.
Great. So you've been, I guess I would highlight too that we actually have recorded a previous interview together along with Pete Schmidt, where we talk about clinical trials more broadly than we'll talk about them in this conversation today.
Great.
So, we'll put a link to that in the description of this video, and we can move people to that conversation if they want a sort of broader overview. But let's talk about the Sunrise PD trial. And maybe we should start by talking about the candidate. This is a medication intervention trial, so let's talk about the candidate being investigated. As I understand it, the primary goal of this trial is to investigate whether Bezisterim can help manage motor symptoms of Parkinson's as a monotherapy. That's the name of the treatment candidate, Bezisterim. And there are other monotherapies for Parkinson's, and if this trial is successful and the treatment is ultimately approved, I think this would be the first monotherapy that would be treating Parkinson's by treating inflammation or targeting inflammation anyway. Can you talk about why a new monotherapy just generally would be exciting and important clinically, and maybe also say a little bit about why targeting a treatment at inflammation has been challenging? I mean, we know inflammation is involved in Parkinson's, but we haven't had a treatment like this yet. So, do you think you can tackle those two for me?
I'll try.
Great.
This trial looks at treatment of Parkinson's disease very differently. We all know a little bit about what inflammation is. If you scratch yourself, it gets red around where you scratch yourself. That's inflammation. And inflammation wanders. If there's a low-level inflammation in this nigrostriatal pathway, that pathway is not going to function as well. And so their thought was, let's improve the function of the pathway. Let's not add more neurotransmitter. And so in the past, our drugs have really been focused on how do we improve the connection of these two cell pathways in the nigrostriatal synapse. And we've tried to do that by giving more dopamine, as we do with levodopa, or giving other treatments like dopamine agonists to have a more dopaminergic function. So this is a trial that really is targeting how do we improve all cellular function if it's related to inflammation. We've never had really an ability to address inflammation directly in the brain because we have what's called a blood-brain barrier to protect our brains from toxins or whatever, bad things. So the size of this molecule is unique because it's small enough where the blood-brain barrier will not keep it from getting to where we want it to go, which is in this pathway.
Great. So I guess what I'm hearing is that this is going to be a little bit, what makes this particular treatment candidate interesting in one sense is that it's not adding the neurotransmitters in the way that a dopamine agonist or levodopa does, and therefore it may be less likely to have some of the negative impacts that some of those other treatments have. We'll have to see.
Yeah.
That's part of the point of the trial, but dyskinesia might be amplified by taking more dopaminergic therapy, and that may be less likely with this particular treatment approach.
So in the most optimistic terms, way more optimistic than we should be in when we conducting clinical trials. But the reason we're excited about this is we're trying to make these cells work normally. And when we add levodopa, as you mentioned, we can have dyskinesias if there's too much levodopa or there's too much decline in those cells. And if we add a dopamine agonist, we can produce these behavioral symptoms. And so at best hope we're going to restore neurologic function in this area that's a little bit faulty and with much less risk of motor or behavioral side effects.
Great. So this sounds like there is some real reason to be interested in this as a person living with
Yeah, I think so.
Parkinson's. And we'll have to see what comes of the trial. That, we don't want to be too enthusiastic here, but this is an interesting approach. And so I also want to say another thing about this. I've read a little bit about Bezisterim, and it seems like there's maybe some potential for disease modification here, but this trial itself is not looking into that. Um, that being said, it is conceivable that if this current research that's going on, the Sunrise PD trial, shows that bezisterim has a clinical effect with regards to symptoms of Parkinson's, that future trials may investigate bezisterim as a disease-modifying therapy that could impact progression of Parkinson's because of its anti-inflammation attributes. But that's not the point of this trial, but it is possible. And if somebody were to look into this a little bit, they might find references to that possibility. And we just want to draw attention to the fact that this trial is not directly going to prove or disprove whether this treatment candidate has that impact.
Correct.
So before we go into details of how this trial functions and what what the pieces of the trial are, maybe can you just say a little bit about what we know about bezisterim from previous research?
So in researching a compound for approval for human use, you have to go through several steps. The first step is just looking at cells in petri dishes, frankly. It's a lot more than that. But when we really begin to get interested in looking at a compound for humans, we do animal studies. And in the early animal studies, bezisterim produced an improvement in motor function and reduced the dyskinesias associated with levodopa. And possibly protected neurons responsible for producing dopamine. Most importantly, to move on, the animals tolerated this drug without side effects and without adverse events. So that led to the next phase where we do very small studies looking at safety. And so there have been a small study of 46 participants who already were on treatment, so they were somewhat advanced. And it was a trial designed to look at interactions between levodopa and bezisterim and to see if there was possibly any motor change. But really, the first trial was looking at safety. The drug was safe and well tolerated, but there was some evidence of improved movement and so motor abilities, and also possibly some non-motor symptoms. So patients reported less fatigue and less symptoms of restlessness at night.
So you mentioned the adverse events involving the animals and how that was the early trial in animals was pretty straightforward in terms of having minimal adverse events. And in fact, I don't think there were any that I've read about. And you said that it was well tolerated in people with Parkinson's in that earlier trial. Were there any events at all that were worth noting that were adverse for people with Parkinson's?
So if we looked at total adverse events of the groups receiving bezisterim versus groups receiving placebo, there really were not a difference. But and actually, as I review my notes, no, there really was not any difference between between the active and placebo treatment with this drug.
Great. Okay, so we've talked about a couple exciting elements of this trial, and there's a good safety track record so far, so that's an encouragement. There's some good signs of efficacy. That's an encouragement. But let's talk about the specific design of the Sunrise PD trial. Just to note here, we'll put some links to some of the sites we're going to reference in the description of this video. And that's probably the best place for people to access the full list of exclusion and inclusion criteria. So that we'll have that link in the bottom of the description here. But I wonder if you could just provide some high level, just discussion of the elements of this trial. And first of all, this is a phase 2 trial. So can you explain what that means?
So phase 2 is still a safety study, and so we're still in a process where we're making sure this drug can be safe in humans. I believe that safety trials are much more important than efficacy trials because a lot more we look at safety, the more likely the drug will be something that will benefit patients and not harm them. This safety trial is going to look at some efficacy, but it's going to, I guess the most important exclusion criteria for the people watching is if you've already started treatment, you're not going to be eligible. we're trying to get very early patients because we want to look at patients who still have more intact nigrostriatal pathway. Because if we reduce the inflammation there, that's going to be more likely that we have more cells to treat. And so look at the inclusion criteria if you're not on carbidopa or not on a treatment like carbidopa, levodopa, or dopamine agonist before you get too excited about participating in this safety study. There'll be future studies when patients on treatment can be seen. But in terms of where we go from there, it will be the result of this fairly brief study, and I assume we're going to talk a little bit about the uniqueness of the trial next. Is that where we're headed?
Yeah, we'll get there in a moment. I just want to see if we can just get, there's a couple parts of this trial, right? So
Right.
there's about 20 weeks of participation overall. And can you just lay out a little bit of the lay of the land for what somebody would expect if they are eligible in terms of that 20-week process? I mean, I think there's three big phases, right?
Right. So there's a screening process where we really evaluate your eligibility and look through how if you're eligible to participate in the trial, and it can be done. There's a treatment phase, and so it's a kind of a 4-month total, but there's a brief period where screening, there's a phase where you're on treatment, and then there's a period of follow-up where we make sure that when you're off the drug, you have no sustained effects, either good or bad.
Great. So not a very long trial, but there is a commitment here. It's 4 months or so, but it's not too terribly long in terms of how long trials can be. So there's a benefit there too. I mean, it can be a challenge to commit for a very long time as a person living with Parkinson's. Things change, so it's sort of encouraging to know that the trial isn't going to be too encumbering for that reason. But okay, so we've covered the basics here, and I guess there's another innovative element that we want to draw attention to, and that relates to the locations from which a person can participate. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of the trial?
Sure. I like this trial because it is trying to look at real world and Parkinson's disease. And so for my entire career, when we did Parkinson's disease clinical trials, we asked people who were participating to come into my office, and we did very rigorous testing. But it really, if you think about it, we started approving drugs that were result of a 20-minute assessment in a doctor's office. You don't live your life in 20-minute assessments in the doctor office. And so we want to be able to look at you in various settings. There are 4 centers in which you can come into the doctor's office. But you don't have to do that. We have set up a way to come into your homes and do our assessments in a place where you live.
So let me ask a couple questions about that. I understand that this is uncommon. I've never heard of a trial like this, right? Where you can participate from home and I guess that means somebody's going to come to my home that's associated with the trial, and they'll deliver whatever needs to be delivered and do whatever exams need to be done. Is that what's going to happen if I participate from home?
Right. There is a trial called Topaz that looks at bone fracture in people with Parkinsonism. So I helped design that trial, and it's people prone to fall. Is Parkinson's disease. And so we would send a nurse into the home and give patients an infusion of something that makes bones stronger, with the thought that if you fall with Parkinson's disease, if you have stronger bones, you wouldn't have fracture. So that was the first home assessment Parkinson's disease protocol. The only reason I bring it up is I know it can be done because we've done that.
In this trial, the Sunrise PD trial, they'll bring you the medication.
That's
They'll
right.
execute whether it's medication or placebo, I should say. They'll bring
Right.
you your intervention based on whatever group you're in.
And this will be the first trial that really looks at motor assessment. So patients will be videotaped, and we've worked very hard to get a kind of a standardized videotape protocol that the nurses coming to your home will know how to do. We've assembled a group of reviewers of that video to grade scores in a blinded fashion. But we have worked very hard to make the rating scales very consistent across our reviewers. And then we will double check the reviewers with another review of that to make sure that everybody's in agreement to say, all right, here is the patient's motor score today. And it's a lot like the Unified Parkinson's Rating Scale, but we won't assess rigidity or stiffness of limbs. We'll just assess the components that can be videoed.
I see. That makes sense because that would the rigidity test would be if you're examining me by touching me in the office, for
Right.
example, by feeling my arm to see if it's got some abnormal tension in it or something to that effect, right?
Right.
Okay, great. Well, that's really exciting to me that this participation from home aspect of this trial. You know, I think so many trials tend to occur near bigger metropolitan areas where there are sort of university hospital systems most often, and so that can limit the groups of people that can participate in
Right.
trials. And I think that this is really exciting to be able to get a more accurate picture of the full community of people living with Parkinson's. This sort of trial design is really exciting. Um, so if somebody wants to participate in the Sunrise PD trial, what would you recommend they do?
First, I'd go to the website, and that's sunrisepd.com. I assume you'll send that link to them.
Yeah.
Then I think you ought to talk to your family and people important to you to say, I have this trial. It's a unique mechanism. What do you think? But you've got to make the decision if you want to pursue participation. You can reach out to the study team, and I'm certain that you'll have a way for people to reach out to be contacted by a study team. Um, and then talk to your doctors, talk to the study team advisors, and make an informed decision. Clinical trial work is an important aspect to how we get better and better treatments for Parkinson's disease. I would urge you to contact the people with very mild Parkinson's who don't need therapy may not be as likely to be watching Davis Phinney productions. And so you need to tell people that you know who aren't on treatment that this study is really important to everybody with Parkinson's disease. I can't be a part of it now because I'm on medication. But if you're a part of it and we see that it's something effective for everybody, then I'll have a chance to do that. Please think about participating.
Yeah, that's an important observation because I think a lot of people do start a medication right away. It's in fact some people start a medication when they're in the process of being diagnosed because they undertake what's known as the levodopa challenge, so to speak, quote unquote, where to help determine if you have Parkinson's, sometimes people will start on levodopa, and when that has an impact, it's hard to stop doing that. So sometimes people start very early and there's no problem with that, but it does limit the range of or the size of the group of people who we know have Parkinson's and also are eligible to participate in this trial or any trial for that matter that doesn't have that has an exclusion criteria which is related to whether you're taking any medication. So, Dr. Stacy, thanks for taking your time to talk with me today. I wonder if before we close, given that you have such a broad experience of clinical trials over your career, I wonder if you can share your perspective about what you've seen people with Parkinson's get from participating in clinical trials. I mean, it's not always easy to see why you might, as a person with Parkinson's, choose to do this. And I think you probably have seen a lot of people get something from participating in trials. Do you have any insight into that?
So I think trial participation in Parkinson's disease is an important way to begin to learn about the condition that you're going to be faced with for 25 to 30 years. And um, I always feel an obligation to provide participants in research trials some further information to say, all right, here's what you expect, here's where you can find this information, and just you having more time to interact with me over most trials are occurring visits fairly frequently, a week, 2 weeks, even a month. But you will not see me every month outside of a clinical trial. And so I think contact with a doctor is an opportunity for you to ask more questions and learn more. It's an opportunity for you to ask questions of coordinators and learn more. It's an opportunity for you to have a way to reach out to coordinators when something comes up, because we are obligated to answer the phone both from a prescribed reason in the rules of study conduct, but you have committed to us and we will commit to you. Um, it's been well documented that people participating in clinical trials, whether they receive the placebo or active group, seem to do better than patients who do not participate in trials. And so I think there is some um, sauce in that leads to improvement in general. And I also think it's interesting to think about new drugs and what it's doing and why I'm doing this. So I think it activates your mind a little bit.
Yeah, I certainly had all those experiences. I didn't mention this yet, but I live with Parkinson's. I know we've talked about that in the past, but um, when I've participated in clinical research in an interventional trial, I had those experiences. You know, I had great connection with the study team. And I still actually correspond with one of the study nurses from time to time, and it's just it provided me with an expanded range of people to to learn from about Parkinson's, and that was really helpful to me. So yeah, thanks for that. Thanks for that insight. And you know, I just want to say again, thanks again for taking some time to chat about this trial with me, and I really look forward to seeing what comes of this trial, and maybe we can talk about that after the results are posted.
That would be great. I look forward to it.
Well, thanks, Dr. Stacy. I look forward to talking with you again soon.
All right. Have a great day.